Astral Ascent is a game that I overlooked for a while, but I've really loved playing it on and off for the last couple months. I've been sending runs regularly since I discovered it. It also just had a DLC release a couple months ago that added another character. So let's get into it. Astral Ascent is a 2D platformer roguelite where you clear rooms of enemies, collect spells and other power-ups, and defeat a slew of bosses. I saw this game described as an anime roguelite. I think that captures the vibe of the game. It has a pixel art aesthetic, but it fits that anime style. You have a basic attack, a signature skill, and 4 spells. You also always have a dash, a double jump, and a ground attack as well. The movement and abilities in this game generally feel quick and responsive. There's very little animation lock, and even longer channeled abilities can often be cancelled to dodge if needed. The game has a somewhat floaty feel to it, with attack animations allowing you to stay in the air indefinitely if you keep hitting enemies. I really didn't like this floaty feel at first for my first couple runs, but once I actually adapted to it, I think it fits the game very well. The game has a fairly spammy combat feel with frequent dodges of enemy attacks, and that floaty nature just fits those vibes. The spell system in Astral Ascent is probably the most unique system that the game has from the character side. Each run, you have 4 slots you can use to place spells in. To use these spells, you spend mana, which is mostly recharged between levels or by using basic attacks. These spells range from simple attacks like summoning a damaging circle around you to more unique or powerful effects, like one spell that turns you into a tornado or another one that summons a massive dragon that attacks nearby enemies. What makes the spell system unique is that you don't play each spell independently on a cooldown. Instead, each spell is played in a cycle, and you can't play a spell a second time until each spell has been played once that cycle. This system felt a little annoying at first with the limitations. I wanted to just play my more powerful spells again and again, as opposed to having to play my weaker spells before I could do so. And because of that cycling quality, I often forgot which spell I had up next, which is important because some spells move you around and can put you in a bad position where you take damage if you're not careful. But I do like that the system forces you to build your spells in a particular way. One, it forces you to balance out your spells, since all spells have to be used before you can use your first spells again. Second, I think it can lead to fun combos with well-ordered spells. A spell that makes you jump backwards can be followed up by a powerful spell that takes time to charge up. That backwards dodge can give you some needed space to use that slower charge up. In that sense, these limitations can lead to new strategies and new combos, but of course, they are still limitations. Outside of that, each spell can have one of 5 elemental types, and each spell has 4 upgrade slots. And that brings us into the build crafting in this game. In these upgrade spots, you can add modifiers that add either on cast or on hit effects. For example, a modifier might make a spell spawn an ally when cast or cause burning every time it hits enemies. You can also stack up to 5 auras and unlimited echoes, which have passive or triggerable effects. These range from simple stat buffs to niche conditional effects that allow for some unique build synergies. Finally, you can add similar passive or conditional effects to your basic attack and signature spell. When this all comes together, it creates a great combo system. Between all these elements, you have a lot of different effects that you can combo together. Often, you'll focus on 1 or 2 elemental types, and within each elemental type, there are also different effects. For example, the fire element has both burn and combustion effects, but it also has wisps and sparks, which are 2 allies you can summon that attack enemies in different ways. So within each element, there are also different focuses and therefore different builds. I really enjoyed the build crafting in Astral Ascent, and it's one of the main reasons that I've enjoyed this game as much as I have. I've loved trying out different combos, and the auras have a lot of fun synergies, even across elements, that just led to fun build crafting. Occasionally, as you stack up these passive and active effects, the game can have effect spam, and that can create a lot of visual clutter when combined with swarms of enemies and their respective attacks as well. This never held back my enjoyment, but it can make the game very cluttered, and you can lose yourself in the effects sometimes. Additionally, the game has 4 different base characters that have their own basic attacks, signature abilities, and spells, though there are some common spells across characters as well. These signature spells can have powerful effects, either on fairly short or relatively long cooldowns depending on the character. For example, Kieran has fire and martial focus attacks, while Octave has abilities that focus on projectiles and summoning drones. It's also worth noting the Kieran's signature ability allows him to block and parry attacks, but it's not an ability that can be spammed on repeat. That's to say, Astral Ascent does have parrying, but it's not a core mechanic in the same way it is in other games. Each character also has 3 different weapons that can be unlocked, and each of those 3 weapons have 3 different pass abilities as well. So as a whole, there's good variety both between characters and within characters when you use the different weapons and the different passive effects for those weapons. This game is also a great Steam Deck game. It ran great on my Steam Deck, and I played quite a few runs on it. The game handles great on controller, that's how I play it on PC anyways, so the control scheme there is nice as well. Also, it's worth noting this game is still getting very regular updates, like adding an extra aura slot that allowed for more fun build crafting. I originally wrote this script in August, and since then, they've added some crossovers, new mini-bosses, and reworked a couple systems, like the Forge events, to make them more interesting. They still have several large updates on their roadmap, and other DLC planned for early next year. Now let's talk about variety and randomness in Astral Ascent. There are a couple big areas where RNG can come into play run to run. First, the RNG can determine your build. You do always have a lot of options, but also I would often be led down a certain build path based on early game RNG, especially when I was newer to the game. For example, if my starting aura and spell both had effects related to burning or increased damage against burning enemies, I would probably run a burn build during that run. That being said, as I played more, I did find more flexibility, especially because the game has a lot of unique crossover auras and passives that allow you to combine 2 seemingly different builds with unique effects. Because of that, as I got better at the game, my builds might change from that burning build to a completely different build, or I might get one of those unique auras that combines burning with electrical sparks and create a unique build that way. And that's good because it's more fun for me to have adaptable builds as opposed to my build being set in stone based on early game RNG. So as a whole, I think the build crafting dynamic struck a great balance between having your build guided by that randomness versus being able to determine your own build. If you really want to have a certain build, you can always get something of a certain elemental type, but you can never force something as specific as a burn build, for example, or a critical damage build. But you could force something more broad as a fire build or an ice build, for example. It was always fun to work with what I got and to have to decide when it's worth replacing parts of my build to go in a different direction. In terms of non-RNG variety, I think the characters do feel very distinct, especially with how their signature spells work. The game does a good job with different weapons and passive for each character, though there are definitely a couple dud weapons that just feel clunky or very bad to play with, like the big gun for Octave, for example, that I never vibed with. I also like that some of these weapon passives add fun mini-games or objectives, like the big bullet passive for Octave starter weapon that encourages you to pick up a bullet that spawns around you for increased damage. Little gameplay quirks like that just added more depth to the combat of Astral Ascent, which, at its core, is not overly complex. Enemy variety-wise, the basic and elite enemies had good variety, but also nothing super special. The areas are always the same 4 areas in the same order, but they do a good job of feeling distinct in regards to theme and having the enemies had different movesets. This game also has elite enemies that spawn that have additional effects that make them harder to fight. Another good source of variety on the enemy, or really the map design side, is that there are a lot of different types of rooms. There are enemy rooms where you have to kill all enemies that spawn in waves, and there are rooms where you have to run past enemies as a more run and gun, I guess, type mission level. And there are also different buff rooms, different spell rooms, there's a mini boss room, there's specific challenge rooms, a lot of ways to build out your build in different ways. On top of that, the boss variety in this game is incredible. The game has 12 bosses, the 12 zodiacs, and each run you fight 4 of them. There are, of course, some overlapping movesets, but by and large, 90%, each boss feels very unique. They're all fun to learn as well as master, and it adds a lot of run variety because there are so many different combinations of those bosses. Along with the fun build crafting, the boss variety is the other biggest selling point of Astral Ascent for me. There just aren't that many roguelites that have better boss design than Astral Ascent. So Astral Ascent has good variety in 2 main areas, good build variety and great boss variety. Most builds take on a similar style of passive or effect stacking. There are enough differences between those passives and those effects to make it fun for me, and the bosses, as I said, just are really fun to master and fun to learn. Astral Ascent is a game with a hefty amount of progression, and a lot of that progression is vertical progression, or upgrades that make you more powerful run to run. Before going into details, it's worth knowing that Astral Ascent is a game that takes some time before you're actually really playing around with all the game systems, because it takes a while to actually unlock all of the system. Getting into those systems, there are 3 main currencies that are used: experience, sun pieces, and destiny fragments. Experience is gotten passively by going on runs and killing enemies. It unlocks some items directly, like new NPCs or new auras. It also unlocks the ability to buy new upgrades, which we'll talk about later. Some pieces are similar to experience, and you get most of them by just going on runs and killing enemies. However, you can also get them for completing tasks, most notably completing certain challenges like killing 20 enemies in a certain area or fully upgrading 5 spells across all of your runs. Unlike XP that unlocks things automatically, sun pieces unlock what you choose to unlock. Horizontal progression-wise, these pieces can be used to unlock more spells, both general and character-specific spells for future runs. I think these 2 systems of experience and sun pieces work well together. It's a nice combination of progression on the rails with the XP system, where things unlock in an automatic and logical order, mixed with actual spending of sun pieces that allows for some nice prioritization of the upgrades you actually care about. There are also smaller progression systems here and there, like fashion tickets you can find on runs that allow you to change the color of your character's outfits. As another form of horizontal or variety-focused progression, each character can also have 3 different weapons or basic attack sets, as well as 3 passives for each of those weapons. All these are unlocked by completing specific challenges, and they're a nice fun goal to work towards. For example, one might require you to get 3 perfect rooms in a given run, aka 3 fights where you take no damage, in order to unlock a new passive for a certain weapon. Vertical progression-wise, they're 2 separate but complementary systems. The first system uses sun pieces to unlock direct buffs, like increased aura slots, increased starting keys, things like that. The second system uses destiny fragments to also unlock direct buffs, like increased starting damage modifiers and 1 revive for each level. Both of these systems take time to complete, but the second skill tree takes an especially long time because of how you get destiny fragments, which I'll talk about in a second. It definitely felt a little weird to me that this game has 2 parallel vertical progression systems. And while they do unlock separate things, they achieve the same overall goal of cross-run buffs you can unlock with time. There are some differences in regards to how they feel. The sun pieces unlock permanent upgrades, while destiny fragments are more like a skill tree where you can reallocate them across runs to try out different combinations, different buffs. But again, it's the exact same goal, 2 systems doing more or less the same thing. Regardless, I think both these systems work well for what they are. So as you can maybe tell, Astral Ascent fits closer to games like Rogue Legacy with that magnitude of vertical progression present. If you want a progression-heavy roguelite, then Astral Ascent is a good one to check out for that. Fortunately, and importantly, to go along with that strong vertical progression, there are a lot of difficulty levels called destiny levels. You can climb up to 80 levels of difficulty in this system. Like the rest of the progression, these levels are perhaps a little more complicated than they actually need to be. The first 6 destiny levels are Ascension-like levels, where each level unlocks a new challenge. Very notably, some of these levels add new movesets and mechanics to both basic enemies and the bosses. I think this difficulty system is really great, and I love unlocking new challenges, new movesets, new actual gameplay systems with higher levels. After those first couple unlocks, the difficulty system turns into a Hades Heat-like system, where you can stack additional challenges of your choice to increase the level. Each level also increases boss health and damage, regardless of what that challenge is. Along with giving a greater challenge, these levels also allow you to unlock more destiny fragments, which you get for beating each individual boss at higher levels. I like that you get these fragments for each boss defeated as opposed to just beating a run. It adds more variety that way, but also because the bosses are randomized, sometimes you want to defeat a certain boss to get those fragments, but you just don't get that RNG for a while. Notably, once you're past those first few destiny levels, you can raise the level as high as you want and earn multiple destiny fragments per boss if you skip several levels ahead. And that's great because with 80 levels, it would be super tedious to have to go through all of them one by one if you weren't being challenged. Some of these challenges are pretty easy, while some of them are very punishing. so it's a good mix of options to fit to your gameplay style. I like this Destiny level system as a whole. I think it adds a nice goal to strive for in combination with that vertical progression. I like that it adds new tangible gameplay differences with new movesets for the enemies and bosses. That being said, like the vertical progression system, it feels a little more complicated than it actually needs to be. It's very learnable. It's not that hard once you actually dive into it. It was nice to slowly unravel all of these systems and mechanics one at a time. But it also gave me a repeat reaction of, oh, wait a second, there's a new system that works differently, but the old system's still there. And I'm sure that style of just feeling like the game systems are resetting almost every couple runs will rub some people the wrong way. It just takes a while to feel like you're finally at the end game, so to speak, that you're truly playing the full game. That being said, I think the Destiny levels and the rest of the progression really satisfy those progression-hungry fans of roguelites. Astral Ascent has actually a pretty decent amount of story and world building. In this game, you're playing as various warriors trying to fight against the Master, who is this evil supervillain who has conquered many worlds and trapped the heroes of those worlds in prison worlds. On each run, you're fighting through these prison worlds in order to defeat the Master once and for all. The game tells the story in a few different ways. Notably, the game has cutscenes that tell the story and also introduce the different characters. These cutscenes are one of the reasons that this game has been described as an anime roguelite. They have an anime feel to them. Further, you can unlock story fragments, which are short lore entries that tell more backstory for all of those playable characters, as well as the 12 Zodiac bosses. There are also a lot of small interactions between your characters and the various NPCs that are fully voice acted. These interactions just nicely flesh out the world and add tidbits of lore here and there. Finally, when you beat the game with different characters or different Zodiac powers at a high enough level, you can unlock endings to the game that tell the story of those characters and the Zodiacs. Overall, I think Astral Ascent has some pretty great world building. I really like the different cutscenes and all of the characters. It has great presentation with those cutscenes, and the voice acting is also pretty good. Some of the dialogue is definitely better than others, and it can occasionally be super cheesy, but I still enjoyed it as a whole. The actual story itself is fairly straightforward, but I think it fits the roguelite structure well, and it's about as good as you're going to get world building wise in a roguelite outside of games like Hades. Before I talk about the DLC itself, I think it's worth mentioning that a lot of things have been added to this game since the 1.0 full release. And the vast majority of those changes don't require the DLC in order to experience them. This includes new ways to build craft, more aura slots, expanded progression in difficulty levels, and a lot of different smaller things. This DLC itself mainly adds a new character called Yamat. Since the base game only has 4 characters, this is actually a fairly big addition. Like other characters, she has her own 3 weapons with their respective passives, and she has her own pool of spells as well. Her spell list is notably shorter than other characters. She has less spells, but they make up for it by being more unique and more fun to play around with. 2 of her weapons are melee focused, with her 3rd weapon being auto-aiming and targeting. Along with that, her signature spell allows her to float around the map and spam quick, rapid attacks at enemies. Like a lot of her abilities, her signature spell is channeled. Her playstyle as a whole focuses on more powerful hitting spells with increased costs, like that powerful ability that summons a dragon to blast the whole map and all the enemies around you. I quite liked playing as Yamat. I think she's a good character, but she's also just fun with her new powerful spells that feel satisfying to use. I got quite a few good runs out of her and had a lot of fun playing with her. Because of that, I would say this DLC was definitely worth it for me at only $5. At the same time, it's a very unnecessary DLC. It's worth grabbing if you're a fan of the game, but it's definitely not required to get that good, core, fun experience of Astral Ascent. So, what's my verdict on Astral Ascent? Overall, I've been having a great time playing this game since I first discovered it. The combat feels fun, the build crafting is satisfying, and the presentation and the world building and a lot of small things here and there create an overall great package. I've had so many fun runs, different builds, and different characters. Because of that, I think Astral Ascent is definitely worth picking up if you like action roguelites. I honestly don't think Astral Ascent has huge downsides, so much as some trade-offs and a couple areas that fall short. First, the game has a hefty amount of progression in systems that are a little convoluted and overly complicated at times. It's nothing unlearnable, but it's more complicated than it needs to be and will put some people off that want that more streamlined or minimal progression. Second, the combat is spammy or floaty and can be a little chaotic at times. Overall, I loved it, but there are definitely some visual clarity issues. It's also not going to be a game for you if you want more grounded or more tight combat. And while the spell system is unique, being forced to use your spells in a certain way can be frustrating at times. Finally, while I really enjoyed the cutscenes, the characters, and the world, it's still not Hades level narrative in a roguelite. And some of those characters can be really cheesy in a way that I'm sure some people will find cringy or a little off-putting. Like I said, none of these reasons killed my enjoyment of Astral Ascent, but they are all reasons that Astral Ascent might not be the best game or most enjoyable game for every single person out there. On the flip side, if you're a big fan of action roguelites, if you're a big fan of passive stacking, that type of build crafting, or if you're a big fan of progression-heavy roguelites, I strongly recommend checking out Astral Ascent. Huge shout out to all of our channel members for helping support the channel. Please like this video to help me out in the algorithm, and thanks for watching.